Well, good afternoon, guys. We're here for our, I believe this is our fourth meeting of 4896. It's October 5th, 2021. So I've got some things down. I thought that I would just start out today with a proposal to you guys of what we're thinking about for implementation of the 4896. And so without further ado,
thank you.
Is this the same PVT workfit we were looking at?
it is. Yep. This is still the program through Pulsar Informatics that we did the webinar with. After you guys have had a chance to read that, maybe I'll go through and highlight the bulleted points just for the record and for those that may be watching, and then to give you an opportunity to discuss any of the components individually.
Yeah, if you want to go through, and we have I guess a similar bulleted list that maybe we could see how they mesh together. I think they're going to mesh together pretty well.
Sounds good. So our thought was, we had talked before about an implementation date sometime around the first of the year. We were hoping to implement and reach agreement on the usage of the Pulsar Informatics fatigue risk management system to get some data on our current schedule. We were hoping sometime in October that would give us about a quarter's worth of data before we transitioned, because I think it will demonstrate what a lot of anecdotal stories have said, that this new schedule does actually help with fatigue. And so still trying to target that January-ish timeframe. I did put January/February, understanding that we don't want to unnecessarily delay it, but January is a very busy time of the year with close of the year for fiscal and a lot of the IRS reporting and stuff like that for finance. And so we're keeping mindful of that. I would just say that even though it says January/February, the reason I put the February in there is to accommodate the fact that we would like to get a couple months of data. I realize now it's not going to be a quarter, but I think if we could at least get a couple, 2 months, that would be good. And also understanding that we were going to coordinate with finance to pick a date, the date that we had spoken about last time. For FLSA implementation, I believe, was January 15th. Mm-hmm. So that's still...
Is there a date in February that works? That's a middle shift right after?
It would be a middle shift of one of the platoons, preferably on a payday, Skynet had said, but I would like to get their buy-in on that, whether that's a nice to have or a must-have thing.
Okay.
So I think the must-have for us is a middle date of one of the platoons currently. That's the least impact to premium hour pay, and then we want to accommodate finance in the process of what's going to best work with their workflow. So number 2 was the Pulsar Informatics Fatigue Risk Management System. We watched that webinar last time. We wanted to fully implement their policies, which is the psychomotor vigilance testing, the policy development, the fatigue meter, and then the countermeasure, which is for the employee only. The organization doesn't have access to that information. That's just for an employee to understand their sleep, their fatigue, their work rest cycles, etc. And then I did add a fourth bullet point in there that, just as we're talking about a lot of this, we believe this is a very intriguing product from Pulsar Informatics, and we think that it addresses a lot of the concerns that the city had with fatigue. However, we don't have a crystal ball, and if after at least 6 months we determine that we're not getting useful data out of it, or that maybe the question has been answered and that it's no longer necessary, as long as both parties agree, then we could discontinue the use of the Pulsar Informatics. Third point was the department has the ability to enact policies and guide staffing decisions to move individuals between different apparatus and stations in order to proactively or reactively mitigate fatigue. It was my understanding in some of the conversations we had last time that we kind of all had assumed that that would be kind of in play. If I'm misstating that, please let me know.
And so the intent of that is if we need to split medics, we can split medics.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Or if we need to rotate crews, we can rotate crews.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is something that I think we would work with labor in labor management, as well as in the ops meeting with the battalion chiefs, to say, what does this look like for us, and how do we make good decisions. And then the fourth one is kind of a catch-all, and this one is I think this one is going to be maybe difficult to capture in language, but basically the idea that we agree to meet and address any negative impacts related to the schedule, and that the solution must be acceptable to both parties, and this is necessary because it's impossible to foresee every eventuality, and the city and union agree it's in the best interest of the employees and the organization to be able to address these circumstances in a collaborative manner. And I think that just is saying that if something comes up, either from the labor side that says, hey, we're concerned about this, or from the city side that says, hey, we're concerned about this, then we come together in a labor management setting and we work to understand that concern, that potential problem, and work to address it collaboratively.
Do we want to set a time frame so that that's so that we more or less have a schedule? So it's like after 6 months after we switch schedules, do we want to meet and discuss the impacts and impacts, whether they're negative or positive?
Sure.
I mean, would that be worthwhile to do?
Or do we just want to address them as they arise?
Yeah.
We want to have the ability to
what they're needed.
Yeah. My thought was just as I tried to write it, to just meet to address any negative impacts related to the schedule. And then finally, the fifth one is just the fact that mechanically there will be changes to the contract to reflect a different FLSA period, a different start, a different work cycle, and number 5 would be us working together to address the points in the contract where a different schedule would necessitate that language change. So.
I've got a quick question on that number 4 there. Do you see that being a new, like a committee, say the 4 of us here, or the 5 of us, or whatever, or is that just normal labor management?
I'm fine either way. I think through the normal labor management process, understanding that labor kind of decides who they would like to be in that meeting, and if it were to grow from just the normal principal officers to include some members of this committee, I think that would be just fine.
So we had I guess, kind of similar thing prepared here, bolded list of our ideas about the implementation, and just looking at the two, I feel like, we got a few things that I guess a little bit more administratively lower level than what you have here, just like implementation dates and stuff like that. But for the most part, I feel like the two lists here kind of support each other in a lot of aspects, so I want to take a moment to read through that. And this is, of course, flexible.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't see any language there that is in conflict between the two. We have looked at, and I think we presented maybe a little bit of that potentially in the second meeting, kind of how the transition would work, just from a premium hours and an FLSA period transition. And Christy's done a lot of work at looking at the crossover and how we would do that. And that's kind of how we determined that implementation date, for example, of January 15th. That 24-day FLSA cycle, I agree, is all that, and of course the SOG fallouts. On the PFD fatigue policy, SOG, the third bullet point, recommended action levels regarding PVT work-fit data may be developed. However, final decisions on fatigue management will be left to supervisors, with crew and public safety the highest priority. At no point will mandatory action levels be implemented solely based on PVT work-fit data. What does that mean? Does that mean?
That's essentially saying that we aren't interested in having, I guess, the PVT results put us into a matrix of some kind that blocks us into, if this is your result, this is exactly what has to happen. Be more of a, this is what we're getting, these are our range of options, and if, say, a battalion chief thinks that maybe something outside that range even is an appropriate way to respond to it, that they still have the ability to do that. I guess that we're not totally blocking ourselves in with, say, with an action matrix. This level means this level means this, and there's no exceptions.
When it says at no point will mandatory action levels be implemented, do you envision a situation where somebody, and I'm just going to pull numbers that I recall from that webinar, I seem to recall 12 being their high threshold, their red line, if you will. Does that mean that if someone scored a 13 at some point in their shift, we could mandatorily pull them off the line and either cover them through on-shift or backfill?
I guess, no, you could, that could be an option if they're going to pull from the line, but it would be that there isn't an SOG that is black and white that has a matrix that says, at this number, you come off the line. It would be, at this number, the battalion chief needs to address this issue, and they have a variety of ways to do it.
Maybe something to the effect of, at this number, this is what action is recommended, and if the battalion chief or the supervisor chose to do something different, then they would have to be able to justify that.
Yeah. As long as they're addressing the fatigued employee issue, we're just not locking ourselves into these are the only responses to that fatigued employee.
And looking at this, when the FRMS comes in and helps us develop the policies and procedures, that might be addressed. You know, I think we're kind of getting ahead of it, because here in your proposal, you're saying, hey, they're going to come in and help us design our policies and procedures. And we just wanted to make sure that when they do come in and do that, that we weren't locked into this, you know, almost like DOS programming of if-then situations where we take the human decision-making out of it.
Understood, but why would a supervisor not implement the recommended action? Why would they deviate from, for example, somebody scores a 13 and our policy, if it says they should be pulled off the line and allowed a X rest period, and shouldn't be in like a reserve status or a last call status, that they should be removed from duty because they are not safe to operate. It seems to me that that would be a mandatory no, not a punitive, but a mandatory no, we're removing you from duty for a period of time and replacing you or covering your duties through some method. And I can't see, even though that seems mandatory to me, that at this trigger level we will do this, I can't see why we would want to not follow that from a risk management standpoint and an employee safety standpoint.
I guess one idea that I have on it is, you know, let's say that let's say Scott scores a 12 or 13, and an email pops up and says, Scott, looks like you may be fatigued, and but Scott says, no, I'm fine, I feel absolutely fine. My phone's acting weird. I just got it updated and it's acting really weird. I'm fine. I'm really okay. I only went on one call last night. We're not bound to, you know what I'm saying. But if we go talk to Scott and he goes, yeah, I'm pretty beat up. I'm tired. Well, at least we're keeping the human element in the, and I think we're all on the same page that it's a measurement, it's a tool, and if we have a good accurate measurement, then yeah, we should do what's recommended. But we're not bound by the letter, you know. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the way I see it.
I think the recommended action levels, or however they were defined, I would say to be followed almost every time, because is what would make sense. But it doesn't bind us to it. If there's extenuating circumstances of some kind, that then one of our supervisors can look at and say, I see what this is saying here, but given this other information, I think this is a better course of action.
I don't think we're trying to get out of what it's recommending. I think from my perspective, we're just trying to keep the human element part of the decision. I
think if I were to try to draw an analogy for what I'm hearing you say is that the axiom that we use is to treat the patient, not the monitor. Is
yes.
That kind of the thought there? So when it says final decisions on fatigue management will be left to supervisors with crew and public safety the highest priority, how high is the supervisor level? Does senior staff get to weigh in at some point in those decisions?
I think so. I mean, ideally, we're going to try and manage our fatigue at the lowest level.
Understood.
But it certainly would travel up the chain if required.
Okay. I think I understand what your concern is there.
And if you look at the fourth bullet point, it does say the AC of operations.
The fifth point, let's see, PT workers, that would be.
Yeah, so.
Actually, I think that's actually pretty clear.
Okay, yeah, we really would like to see this information, again, not dictate decisions with ambulance transfers, and particularly late night ones, but be a part of the decision process.
A tool again.
Yeah.
Okay. So, being that it's my opinion, and I'm certainly not a legal scholar, but these two documents to me don't look to be in conflict at all. Where would you see us going from here to start to work on the actual contract language that memorializes these ideas, the implementation date, the reference to the Pulsar informatics, the staffing abilities? My thought is that would be a bullet point maybe in the management rights. And then just the agreement to address impacts. How are you seeing us move based on these two documents, merging the two and getting to our next point?
Yeah, we're not legal experts either, but it seems to me that if we can, in this setting, come to an agreement that these are the bounds we want to work within, and now we just need to develop the language that we can then bring back to another public meeting of some kind. I would sure like to be able to hopefully here say, yeah, we're good with this, and then start working on this in the background, more in-house to get it developed, and then bring it back to the public again.
Do you mind if we take a 10-minute caucus?
I would not. You need a legal opinion?
Indeed.
Yeah, sounds good.
I will, we'll be right back. Okay, you guys, I have a couple questions just to kind of expand upon a few thoughts. I want to go back to the third bullet under the fatigue policy about work fit data may be developed and action levels, however final decisions on fatigue management will be left to supervisors. I really think that the matrix is kind of what we're looking for, and the guide to decision making from a risk management standpoint. And I think one of the things that's going to ensure is good risk management, and another is consistency among platoons instead of having multiple different supervisors on different platoons that address fatigue in a different manner. And so I think that one of the things that is appealing to us about this work fit is the decision-making matrix. And while I understand that's kind of, it's like trying to buy a car without maybe being able to test drive it or see, and maybe we can get some sample language. But I think that the decision-making matrix and kind of the guide to decision-making is an important tool that we're looking for to satisfy some of our concerns about fatigue from a risk management perspective. And so those are the concerns we have with that bullet point. I agree that we don't want a hard and fast rule that that says, hey, I scored a 13, but I feel fine and I've been having problems with my phone, well, then I think we retest and we look at what's going on. I'm not suggesting that we say, nope, this says you're unconscious, and you're like, but I feel fine. I think that would be the outlier, whereas I think our hope is to get a good tool to guide decision-making, not a tool that guides decision-making, but ultimately the decision is left to the subjective, because then I think you're deviating from what is a recommended best practice from the industry experts.
I don't know that we're too far off of that. I mean, I do think that we're definitely interested in having it be used for guidance and to support all the decisions that are made. But I guess we were trying to look at it more from the perspective of like our response guidelines, where, if we have this is how things should go. So there's always a caveat at the top that says, but the IC may deviate if necessary.
Yeah.
But in general, 99% of the time, this is what we follow. And so I think we're interested in that matrix and the recommendations that it has for the different issues we might face. But again, not saying it's the only way to go. 99% of the time, it would be the way to go.
I think we're on the same page. I really do.
So maybe it's just finding a way to articulate what we all are kind of getting at.
What about if we had something to say, if we run into these problems, then we could also address those in, as a negative impact, not just to the schedule, but to the fatigue policy.
Sure.
99% of the time, I think we're going to follow the policy, but if you have that one outlier, then, I think we can just get together and go, hey, here's an outlier, and this was a problem today, and
that may fall under that.
Yeah, it might
impossible to foresee every eventuality.
Sure, because I think we all agree we want to follow the recommendations, and we're not just going to go, oh, he's a 15, but he's a good guy. I think if you score something high, then we have to seriously take a look at it, and if the recommendation says to move him, then we're going to move him unless there's something really crazy going on. And then I think that's going to, whether that kicks a red flag or that marks something that we, anytime we deviate from that, we as a supervisor would have to explain and be willing to come to you the next morning or come to you that day and say, hey, this is why I deviated and I had a pretty good reason. Or
and maybe another way to illustrate the thought would be is the other end of the spectrum of, hey, this crew, everybody scored well on their work fit test, but the BC knows that they were up all night. He knows they got beat up, and he might say, hey, it works out today that I can get you guys moved over here, make sure you get rest. Your scores look fine, but I'm concerned that it's going to catch up to you later.
Yeah.
And so that would be the other end of deviating from the recommendations. The matrix says, they're fine, let them keep working. The BC would like to be able to say, I see what the data's saying, but here's an opportunity to get them some extra rest. You know what I mean?
I do, but I also think that one of the things that we're hopeful for, and granted we haven't seen the product fully implemented with what these policies or recommendations are, I think part of the appeal is that their matrix or the way they develop their recommendations, it does look at your schedule. It does look at what is known about natural circadian rhythms. They call it a biomathematical model. And so I think it can be used as a planning tool. And so I'm hoping that both the policies will be a planning tool to forecast, this isn't just a point in time that we're making a decision here, that part of that policy is going to say, well, this is what we're forecasting, but also allow the BC to say, well, this is what I think we should do in order to prepare for later or other eventualities, or maybe something that is an outlier that isn't a normal occurrence of the schedule, for example, a planned event or something like that. So I think we are kind of saying similar.
I think we are, and I guess in the end it's going to come down to what the company recommends for the policies.
Yeah.
And I imagine that they probably aren't going to be, a black and white matrix either.
And my recollection is they've said that they don't remove the people from the decisions, that they provide you with tools, but they don't. My impression is that we're not going to get hardline algorithms of the if-then category, but rather they're going to give us tools to make decisions.
Yeah, and I suppose that really what we're really getting at here is that if we go down this road with the company and everything looks fine the way they recommend the policies, then go with it. But if things do end up looking that black and white that we're uncomfortable with, then we're going to have to come back and talk about it.
Okay.
Well, and I think it's worth, just acknowledging that this company, while they do a lot of study and they have their fingers in a lot of things, this is the first time that they're doing anything with fire. And it would be a little bit unreasonable to think that they wouldn't have to make adjustments on the fly, and that what they propose in the beginning is going to be the finished product. I'm sure that they'll have to, that as things go and as they find more data points from us, they may change what their recommendations are. So there may be some adjustment with that.
I guess my understanding of what we're talking about right now, though, is that I don't think that's a sticking point of us moving forward.
Right.
Is that?
No, I agree. And I do think that we're largely on the same page on that. The statement here, the fatigue policy may not be punitive in any aspect. I'd like to propose a thought that I certainly don't think that we would make it punitive from the aspect of being punitive towards an employee for demonstrating fatigue or having a PVT test that revealed fatigue. I would say that it won't be punitive provided that the employee agrees to take the PVT test and does not attempt to manipulate the results. So I think if we say the fatigue policy may not be punitive in any aspect, we have to say provided the employee participates. If we say you will take the PVT test at a certain point during your shift, the employee has to submit to that testing.
That seems reasonable. I mean, you need to participate. I guess we didn't spell that out directly, but yeah, we're definitely interested in implementing it and having everybody be a part of it. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that was not even on the radar when that was put down.
All right.
The idea of not participating.
Just wanted to be clear on that. And then the next one, it says no apparatus will be shut down due to the fatigue policy. If absolutely necessary, overtime backfill may be called in. And those seem to be somewhat in conflict to say that no apparatus will be shut down, but then that overtime may be called in. Again, I think
Do you think it should say overtime will be called in? If the PVT suggests that apparatus be shut down, we'll call in overtime and fill the apparatus?
it struck me as somewhat in conflict, but.
And maybe that's just, this is really informally written.
Sure.
And so, yeah, if there's the wills and there's any shalls or anything
Yeah,
there.
I
They're
just-
not necessarily.
I just want to make sure that we don't end up putting work in on a process and then later say, well, I thought we were going this way, and I say, well, I thought we were going that way, so.
Yeah, I mean, the intent there, I think, is just that we aren't willing to brown out apparatus and leave them in that state because of these fatigue policies. If a crew has to be taken off, then they need to be backfilled so that we're in service, fully in service at all times.
And we don't even know if that's going to be something
Yeah.
that comes from PBT. We wanted to make sure that it's in there, you know,
Yeah.
right?
But, yeah, and just in the interest of making sure that, providing for our safety, that we have enough manpower responding to scenes and the public safety, we just have no interest in browning out apparatus.
I would just say that I have no interest in browning out stations either. However, that is a management decision and a city decision if they should choose to do that. While I think that browning out stations is not the best course of action for responder safety or citizen safety, I also recognize that sometimes that's a political decision and a budgetary decision that may be above my pay grade. So I don't know that we
in
would-
those aspects, it's probably beyond the fatigue policy too.
Yeah. Yeah. So-
And we're talking mainly in relation to fatigue policy.
Sure. Well, I think you have to look at, it's unknown what the frequency or the impact of that is going to be. And while I agree that we may be saying the same thing, I also don't want to overextend and say that this may be a situation where if the impact, and I don't believe it will be, because I know of other departments that are not coming apart at the seams, that are running this schedule. But I also think that that's a strong statement, and that we would probably be going down some of this other language to address negative impacts and think about a solution. And so I'm just trying to be upfront and say that I don't know that the city is going to sign off on that language.
Okay. Well, it may just be that we need to kind of work that around a little more.
It might be that we just eliminate it and work, if that becomes a problem, work it through the,
Addressing negative impacts
Sure.
related to the schedule.
yes.
But I mean, we're all on board with the same point we're getting at here, I think.
And then the last thought I had, if you could walk me through this last bullet point that says disagreements on management of fatigue personnel or policy should first be brought up in layer management with potential solutions agreed upon and implemented. If an impasse is reached, a neutral third party will decide the course of action. It almost occurs to me that this is you could almost say a third settlements of disputes avenue, where we have grievance arbitration and we have interest arbitration. Is this, would we suggest that this is a third category or maybe even a second category under the contract, because interest arbitration would be under the negotiations? Would this be a second category in the contract that we would deal with these differently than a grievance? Or is this similar to the meet and address negative impacts with a path to resolution?
I think they're both targeted the same thing.
I would say that definitely this falls under the meet and address negative impacts. I do like the idea of implementing an interest arbitration like fact finding if we reach impasse on those items. Not as a general rule. I think both sides need to work together, and I think we need to get through things. But if we end up at a sticking point that neither party can buy off on, I think it's always good to have somebody come in and split the baby, so to speak. And so I would view that a little bit more along the lines of interest arbitration, like fact finding.
And that would only be for disagreements related to the fatigue policies. It looks like management of fatigue personnel for the policies.
So I wrote, I think this is my little bullet point. My intent with this, I think, is pretty stated, probably a little better with your number 4. The intent was, I wanted both parties to say, we're going to do our best to agree, and we should try to find a solution that's acceptable to both parties. And then I'm following the logical progression of what happens if that doesn't happen. And if you guys who are more privy to the union negotiating, if that falls into the realm of contract where we go to fact finding or some other thing, then I don't think that's even necessary. I just wanted something in there to say that before we get crazy, we have a little meeting and say, hey, this is a problem, how can we fix it? And so I think your number 4 says what I was trying to say, but I just didn't know what happened at the step 2 when we did that, we met, and now we can't agree. Where do we go from there?
Okay.
I do think your number 4 does a really good job of spelling it out. I do like the idea, like I said, of having something in case, just as a fail-safe, in case we can't make agreement or come to agreement.
That's fair. Understood. I think we're largely on the same page with this. What I would like to do is schedule another meeting where we bring you some actual language to memorialize this into the contract. There was some thought about an MOU versus an amended contract. Since we are at the outset of a 3-year contract, I think it would read cleaner to put some of this language as far as particularly, we're talking about FLSA periods and start dates and defining work weeks and work schedules into the contract, rather than having a contract that reads and having to constantly refer to an MOU, maybe not constantly, but what are your thoughts on that as far as an MOU versus an amended contract?
I agree with where you're coming from completely. I mean, the point of both is just to make sure that we capture the right language, but it'll reduce the confusion if we go with an amended contract to reflect those CBA changes.
Okay. So can we schedule another meeting and we will bring you some contract language, and certainly, you're welcome to look at the contract and see if you've got, if you can identify areas that you think would be impacted by 4896 language. And then we would be able to work on that language at the next meeting before both parties take it to their respective bodies for ratification. Does that sound like an in the conversations that we had before we completely signed off on the red line CBA during negotiations, there were several spots where we had already went through and identified a lot of those items. If you'd like, I can email you that. Obviously, that was from a previous version of the contract that doesn't have all of the final negotiated items in it. Right.
But it would allow you to be able to see the red line of where we notice differences that would have to change.
Right.
And there's a lot of reference to 72-hour employees.
Right.
And that's because we work 72 hours in our work week, and obviously that would have to be adjusted. And
Agreed. And I've done a little bit of the same, but like you just said, it was based on the previous version of the contract prior to us ratifying last month. So,
yeah.
But I think a lot of the work has probably been started, and I think we're close to a finished product.
If you like this was a proposal from the negotiations cycle.
Okay.
That I was referring to a 12-day FLSA period, but it picks out Article 8, 12 and 16 maybe.
Okay.
And the changes that need to be made. The numbers would be different, but.
And I'm guessing that, that those are probably similar to what we've tried to identify, but together we can make sure that we don't miss any.
But yeah, I think those three would fully capture the schedule itself. And then, I don't know if the fatigue policy needs to be captured in contract or in SFG, but.
I think we would just have to figure out how to reference maybe the policy maybe the program or the system without getting into the individual policies, because my understanding, and since our last meeting, we got some information from this company, and they are going to take longer to fully implement their program than we had originally anticipated. They like to have about a 6-month lead time to fully implement this program with employees. But they did say that perhaps we could get started with the PVT program first. And particularly since we're changing schedules, I wouldn't want them to build our policies based on our modified Detroit schedule and then in 2 or 3 months change to the 4896. So my thought is that maybe we can start gathering PVT data, even though we aren't necessarily using it as a decision-making tool. Obviously, we know if somebody scores a 15 that we need to address that as they're looking at the schedule we're moving to, and hopefully by the time we move there, we have those policies. So I will admit their timeline wasn't as quick as I had hoped, but I think that also speaks to the fact that they kind of do a deep dive on your employees and your schedule and help you develop those policies. So, do you guys have any blackout dates next week that will not work?
I may have minimal availability, but these guys can certainly meet without me.
Okay. Should we just, rather than have everybody have to come up with a day that works now, we'll have Autumn reach out like she did last week and be just thinking about blackout dates that you have, and we'll reach out in the morning and try to have a date set for our next meeting. Okay. Hopefully for next week, because I think we're really close to an agreement and moving forward with this and implementing this schedule. Any final thoughts?
When do you see us nailing down the date, start date? Do you think that's coming up?
Yeah, I think so. Meeting? I think by the next meeting we can nail that down.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be very helpful for us to get vacation vetting and stuff figured out.
I'm just going to throw this out there, and it doesn't matter to me. It seems like from a vacation bidding standpoint, we absolutely should have it identified prior to vacation bidding. But my thought, and this is up to you guys, I mean, there would be no impact to vacation bidding if we didn't implement until April 1st. But I realize that that's almost 3 months after our target date of January 15th. And while that jives a little bit better with Pulsar Informatics' normal implementation program, being that we're changing schedules midway, I don't know that we need to follow their traditional implementation schedule. And so, but I agree that we need to nail down an implementation date. I would ask you guys to think about what you would like that to look like.
Yeah, and I guess even beyond vacation bidding, there's a lot of guys that have child care issues,
exactly.
Custody issues, and I've been getting a lot of questions about, do you know when it's going to happen? Do you think? Could you put a percentage on what day you think it might be?
I agree, and I think it's incumbent on us to pick a day that works for the most people, and not just the soonest date or the you know, and so I think as long as we're balancing all that, let's look at picking a date at the next meeting.
The feeling I get is January would be an acceptable day for everyone that I've talked to. But I think everyone's getting a little bit antsy to
Sure.
keep going.
Understood.
Well, and hopefully by the next meeting, you'll have a little better understanding of how the impact of doing a January date would hit finance.
Yeah, I will ask him that.
I definitely would like to see it before April. I mean, I think that the January to February is a good target, but we just need to have, this is the day.
I agree. We need to allow people to plan.
And one thing that I was going to add that I think is, I mean, it's a really minor thing, but when we do talk about those references in the contract where we were talking about like 72-hour employees and stuff like that, the final TA we signed with the city said shift employee, and I think that will be really helpful in clearing that language up in an easy manner.
Yeah, I think so too. In fact, some of the language we had kind of worked on proposing did include that language, so it sounds like we were both thinking down the same path. So.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So, I guess with the legal opinion, are we able to work on any of this collaboratively in-house, or do we need to come back and wait to communicate about contract language changes or ideas until we come back to this forum?
Let me ask our legal counsel that question.
It could certainly be more efficient if
Sure.
we could, meet in the conference room at the station.
Yeah, and I think we've done our due diligence to kind of.
I think we've defined the boundaries.
We've painted the target, and now we're trying to just come up with the fine details like the implementation date or things like that. And so let me reach out to legal and ensure that we're not stepping outside of the bounds of what the TA was,
Okay.
if we do that.
I mean, I certainly think once we have final language, we'll bring it back to a public forum.
Yeah, and that is true. It will be ratified in a public forum at a council meeting. So I will reach out and get an answer to that. I appreciate these thoughts, and I'm glad that we're aligned in so many areas. So, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.